Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The investiture was already in motion when Prince William made the decision nobody inside the palace expected. Guests were seated, ceremonial officials were standing by, and the next stage was only moments away. Then a private message reached William concerning one of Diana's most emotionally charged royal pieces. Camilla had officially registered the tiara as her own. William read the confirmation, looked up, and gave one cold instruction: stop the ceremony. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not move for several seconds. The prince had been expected to take a central place in the investiture, a formal royal ceremony, in which honors or titles are presented to selected recipients. And stopping it once guests and officials were already assembled carried enormous weight. This was not a delayed entrance or a minor adjustment. It meant breaking the rhythm of an event planned down to the minute, with senior household staff already waiting for his signal to continue. The message in his hand explained why. Diana's tiara had been formally registered under Camilla's personal ownership rather than remaining identified with the late princess's legacy, or held under a broader royal classification. For William, that distinction cut deeply. The piece was not simply jewelry passed between generations. It carried memories of his mother's public life, her place inside the monarchy, and a history he believed could be preserved without preventing anyone else from moving forward. William read the wording again and felt his expression harden. A senior aide stepped closer and quietly asked whether the investiture should proceed while the matter was reviewed in private. He folded the confirmation once, set it beside the untouched program, and answered, "No, not until this is settled." The aide waited, perhaps expecting further explanation. None came. Camilla received the interruption almost immediately. She had considered the registration an ownership decision, but now William had turned it into a family confrontation powerful enough to halt a royal ceremony. Her first reaction was confusion, then anger followed. The queen consort asked exactly what he had been shown, and whether the wording had already been circulated beyond the household. The answer made the situation worse. The registration had not been created that morning. Administrative processing had begun earlier, and final confirmation had reached William's side only hours before the ceremony. More troubling still, the document did not describe Camilla as a temporary custodian or ceremonial user. It used language the prince understood as a permanent personal claim, and Diana's historical association had been pushed aside. William acted immediately. He removed his ceremonial gloves, placed them beside the program, and told the senior official at the doorway that nobody was to proceed. Then he instructed his private secretary to trace every authorization behind the registration and determine whether King Charles had known the exact ownership wording before it was approved. The ceremony had been stopped, but the greater question was far more dangerous. Had Camilla acted alone, or had someone inside the monarchy quietly helped her turn Diana's memory into personal property? William's anger did not begin with a registration form, and Camilla's determination did not begin with a tiara. Between them stood the memory of Diana, a woman whose absence had shaped both of their royal lives in completely different ways. William saw the piece as part of his mother's story. Camilla saw a monarchy that had moved forward, and suddenly, one tiara forced both of those truths into the same room. William carried that weight into a private conversation with Catherine. The Princess of Wales watched him struggle to separate duty from emotion, because Diana's jewelry was never simply part of a royal collection to him. These pieces were among the few physical links connecting a global public figure with the woman he had known privately as his mother. That difference mattered. Royal jewelry could be worn for ceremonies, loaned for official occasions, or kept under household control. But personal registration meant something more permanent. It changed how ownership could be understood long after the people involved were gone. William told Catherine that Camilla wearing the tiara would have been difficult enough, but not impossible to accept. What disturbed him was the decision to place it under her personal ownership. To the prince, ceremonial use allowed history to remain intact. Registration risked rewriting that history. Catherine listened without interrupting. She understood that he was not simply fighting over an object. He was fighting against the feeling that Diana's place could slowly be reduced through paperwork. Camilla saw the matter from the opposite side. The queen consort had spent years building a recognized place within the monarchy, and she refused to see herself as a temporary figure living beneath someone else's shadow. When an aide informed her that William had suspended the investiture because of the registration, humiliation flashed through her before anger took over. She told the aide she would not accept a rule suggesting that every object associated with Diana had to remain untouchable forever. Yet even as she spoke, she understood the scale of what William had done. Catherine felt the tension growing before William left the room. She reached for his hand and warned him quietly not to let anger make the next decision for him. The prince paused. He knew she was right, but then another message arrived. Camilla had recently requested a detailed inventory of several pieces linked to earlier royal women. Suddenly, the tiara no longer looked like a single disputed decision. It looked like the beginning of something wider. Camilla received troubling news of her own. William had requested the complete registration trail: dates, signatures, communications, ownership language, and every authorization attached to the change. The queen consort sat alone after her aide left, staring at the empty place where the tiara case had been kept. She reached toward the table, stopped, and slowly pulled her hand back. Anger had finally given way to uncertainty. William believed the paperwork would reveal who had crossed the line, but the deeper he looked, the clearer it became that the real break had happened days earlier, during one private encounter nobody had been willing to discuss. Days before the investiture was halted, the palace had already experienced the moment that made confrontation almost inevitable. There were no cameras, no public statement, and no dramatic announcement. Only Camilla, a royal jewelry curator, and a velvet-lined case opened during a private fitting. What happened in that quiet room would later be remembered as the point when a dispute over history became something deeply personal. Camilla had requested several pieces for review ahead of future ceremonial engagements, occasions where senior royals appear in an official capacity and may wear items tied to the crown's history. The curator had prepared them carefully, but Diana's tiara carried a different weight. It had long been treated as part of a sensitive historical collection linked to her public identity, not as something another royal openly claimed as personal property. That distinction had protected both its ceremonial use and the memory attached to it. Camilla studied the inventory description and asked for it to be changed. Instead of Diana-associated ceremonial piece, she wanted the internal wording to read, "Personal allocation to Queen Camilla." The curator hesitated. She understood that an internal inventory was more than a simple list. It was the household record describing how an object was classified, controlled, and connected to its history. When the curator warned that William could see such a change as deeply personal, the queen consort stiffened. She replied that the monarchy could not preserve every object exactly as it had existed during Diana's lifetime. The curator did not argue. After Camilla left, she closed the case and stood beside the table in silence. Then she reopened it, reread the handwritten inventory card, separated it from the other jewelry records, and called the administrative office. Her documented account of that conversation later became crucial, because Camilla's instruction did not end with changing a label. She had specifically asked for the ownership status to be formally reviewed. William learned part of the story that same evening through Catherine. The Princess of Wales told him privately that Diana's tiara had been brought out for Camilla during the fitting. At first, he did not object. The prince understood that royal pieces could be worn again without their history disappearing. But Catherine then told him the classification itself might be changing. His reaction shifted immediately. Wearing the tiara was one thing. Rewriting who officially possessed it was something else. The next morning made the situation darker. An expedited ownership review was sent to the administrative office, bypassing the slower historical consultation process normally used when an item carried unusual family sensitivity. Then another detail surfaced. Charles had been copied into a briefing note concerning the review. The king's name was there, close enough to the decision to raise the one question William could no longer avoid. Had his father actually read the wording, or had silence been mistaken for approval? One sentence spoken during a private fitting had set everything in motion, and now William was heading toward the only man capable of explaining how it had been allowed to go so far: his father. The door closed with no aides inside. William stood across from Camilla, knowing the investiture remained suspended because of his order. She knew why he had come. Neither began with pleasantries. The argument that followed was not truly about protocol, jewelry, or administrative language. It was about Diana, memory, authority, and whether becoming queen had given Camilla the right to redefine something William believed belonged to his mother's story. William placed the ownership confirmation on the table, but did not open it. The prince wanted to hear the explanation from Camilla herself before showing how much he already knew. Royal jewelry could be reassigned, catalogued, or approved for ceremonial use as generations changed, and those records were the internal system used to show who could wear, control, or formally hold a piece. Camilla leaned on that distinction immediately. She insisted the registration was administrative, not an attack on Diana, and she refused to accept that every object connected to the past had to remain frozen forever. William listened until one question cut through everything else. Had she personally requested permanent ownership wording? Camilla did not avoid the answer. She said yes. The queen consort argued that she had acted within the position she now held, and believed the change reflected the monarchy as it existed today. The prince answered that wearing the tiara would have been one thing. Changing its historical identity without speaking to Diana's sons was something entirely different. Camilla's restraint finally broke. She accused William of turning his mother's memory into a boundary she could never cross, no matter how many years passed or what role she held. He rejected that immediately. This was not about forcing her into the shadows, he said. It was about taking an object known through Diana's life and turning it into something officially described as Camilla's personal possession. The difference was not emotional decoration. It was the entire dispute. William's voice hardened. You had no right to erase where it came from. Camilla pushed her chair backward and stood. She insisted nobody was being erased. He finally unfolded the registration and pointed toward the wording. Then why does her name disappear? For a moment, neither moved. The argument had reached the place both had tried to avoid. Camilla then revealed the details she believed protected her. Charles's office had received notice during the ownership review, and she had taken that silence as proof that the king had no objection. William answered that being informed was not the same as giving permission. He had already requested his father's personal account and wanted to know exactly what the monarch had seen, read, and approved. Camilla stayed standing after William left. Her anger slowly gave way to something colder. She now understood that the next conversation would force Charles between his wife and his son, with Diana's memory sitting silently between all three. Camilla had defended her decision, William had drawn his line, and now only one voice could break the deadlock. But Charles's answer would wound someone whatever he chose. Charles had survived decades of public judgment surrounding Diana and Camilla, but this time the conflict was unfolding inside his own family. On one side stood his wife, insisting she had acted within her position. On the other stood his son, convinced that a line around his mother's memory had been crossed. Charles could not protect both from disappointment. And the longer the investiture remained frozen, the less room he had to avoid choosing. Charles read the administrative record alone. The king understood that royal ceremonial objects could sit under several kinds of control at once: personal ownership, household custody, historical designation, collection management, and sovereign authority, meaning the monarch's final power over certain official arrangements. That overlap mattered because this was no longer a simple argument over who could wear the tiara. It had become a question of who could permanently change the way the piece was classified and whose approval actually carried legal and royal weight. Charles reached the line naming Camilla as personal owner and stopped. He removed his glasses, placed the file down, and said nothing, while his private secretary waited nearby. The monarch knew exactly why William was furious. Diana remained central not only to his son's private grief, but to the public memory of the monarchy itself. Yet he also knew how deeply Camilla resented being treated as though every step she took had to be measured against the woman who came before her. William entered with only one question. "Did you approve those exact words?" The prince did not raise his voice. Charles answered just as carefully. He admitted that he knew an ownership review was taking place, but he had never approved wording that removed Diana's historical association. William held his gaze. For the first time, father and son were not debating emotion. They were trying to find the precise moment where silence had become permission. Charles asked him to restart the investiture while the classification was corrected quietly. The king argued that the ceremony involved people who had nothing to do with the family dispute and should not carry the cost of it. William refused. He told his father that continuing now would make it appear that the ownership decision had already been accepted. The future king would not allow ceremony to become a cover for something he believed still had to be corrected. Charles then found the detail that changed everything. The final wording had been approved administratively because no objection had been recorded during the review window. His office had received the notice. No response had followed. That silence had been treated as consent. The monarch finally understood that his failure to intervene had helped create the crisis. Charles signed a temporary suspension of the registration. The king ordered that the tiara remain inaccessible to Camilla and ceremonial staff until its classification could be reconsidered. He paused, with the pen still touching the paper, then told his secretary to deliver copies to William and Camilla at the same time. "Neither hears it second," he said. Charles had tried to stop the conflict from becoming permanent, but to Camilla, the suspension felt like something far more personal. Her husband had chosen caution over her claim, and the fallout began immediately. Camilla did not shout when the suspension reached her. That was what unsettled the aide standing nearby. She read Charles's signed instruction twice, lowered herself into a chair, and asked one question. "So I cannot even access it?" The answer was no. For the first time since the crisis began, her anger disappeared. The fight had moved beyond William's protest. Her own husband had formally frozen the claim she believed her position allowed her to make. Camilla felt the consequences immediately. The tiara was removed from upcoming wardrobe planning and placed under restricted custody, meaning nobody could use or move it while its official classification was being reviewed. That mattered because the investiture was still suspended, and William had made clear that the ceremony would not resume until the ownership issue had been formally corrected. Inside the household, officials tried to separate the jewelry dispute from the interruption, but everyone knew the two events were now tied together. Camilla stayed with one trusted aide after the room emptied. The queen consort admitted that she already felt diminished, even though the public still did not know the full story. She had believed becoming queen would finally end the need to defend her place inside the family. Instead, One Tiara had reopened the very question she thought had been settled years ago. Her aide tried to reassure her, but she barely responded. Charles arrived privately before the silence could become permanent. Camilla asked why he could not support her until the review was finished. The king did not hide behind procedure. He told her he had failed to read the final wording closely enough, and because of that failure, he could not now pretend he had approved it. She stared at him for a long moment before saying what had clearly been building beneath every argument. Camilla told Charles that Diana still seemed able to enter every important room between them, despite being gone. The monarch's answer was quiet but firm. Diana was still William's mother, he said, and no title, marriage, or passing year could ask a son to forget that. The words hurt, because they were not an attack. They were simply the truth Charles could no longer avoid. Then the administrative review uncovered the detail that ended any remaining uncertainty. An earlier draft had preserved Diana's historical identification while allowing Camilla ceremonial use. That wording was later replaced by stronger language describing personal ownership. The change came after the private fitting request. William had not misunderstood the document. The classification had genuinely shifted. Camilla closed the door herself after Charles left. She kept one hand on the handle for several seconds, fighting tears she refused to let fall. The argument was no longer about whether the paperwork had changed. Everyone now knew that it had. Catherine understood what had to happen next. She urged William to speak to Charles without advisors, documents, or palace officials between them. The papers had settled what happened, but they could not settle what it meant. And William was about to face his father without any palace machinery standing between them. There were no private secretaries, no jewelry advisors, and no folders on the table when William sat down with Charles. For once, the dispute was stripped of royal procedure. It was simply a father and son speaking about a woman who had been wife to one and mother to the other. William did not ask Charles to choose Diana over Camilla. He asked him to protect the difference between moving forward and rewriting what came before. William had taken Catherine's advice because another battle through officials and paperwork would only deepen the resentment. The prince asked for a private meeting with nobody else present, and Charles agreed. The king began by admitting something he had resisted saying aloud. He should have examined the wording before the review window closed. A review window was simply the period in which objections could be raised before an administrative change became accepted. His silence had allowed a decision to move forward that he had never truly approved. William did not hide behind ceremony either. He told his father that stopping the investiture had been partly about royal responsibility, but it had also been deeply personal. Seeing Diana's name disappear from the classification felt like watching part of her history being removed one line at a time. The future king knew objects could move through generations. What he could not accept was the idea that their meaning had to disappear when they did. Charles listened without interrupting. Then the monarch gave his son the reassurance William had needed from the beginning. Supporting Camilla, he said, did not require denying Diana's place in the family's history. The two truths could exist together. His wife belonged to the present monarchy, but Diana would always remain part of William's life, part of the institution's past, and part of a memory no administrative decision had the right to erase. William finally offered a way out. Camilla could receive ceremonial access to the tiara when appropriate, but the permanent personal ownership claim would be cancelled. Diana's historical association would remain clearly written into the classification. Charles agreed. Then the king went further, ordering a broader review so that future changes involving historically sensitive pieces could not be made without direct consultation with family members emotionally connected to them. Charles reached across the table and briefly placed his hand over William's. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then the prince nodded once. The argument that had begun with anger had finally become a decision. William agreed to restart the investiture once the corrected classification was signed and delivered to the relevant household offices. But the palace now faced another problem. The ceremony had been stopped in full view of guests, staff, and observers, and silence had already created its own explanation. Inside the palace, father and son had found their answer. Outside the gates, however, the unexplained cancellation had already exploded into a national royal drama. By the time the palace prepared its explanation, the interruption had already escaped royal control. Television crews filled the pavement outside Buckingham Palace, commentators replayed Diana's history, and photographs of the tiara appeared across screens within hours. What had begun as a private registration dispute was now being interpreted as something much larger, a battle over who could inherit not merely royal objects, but the emotional ownership of royal memory. The palace finally issued a short confirmation. Officials said the investiture had been temporarily interrupted because an internal classification involving a historically significant royal piece required immediate review. An internal classification was simply the official household description showing how an item was recorded, controlled, and connected to royal ownership. The careful wording was meant to calm speculation, but it had the opposite effect. Broadcasters quickly connected the piece to Diana and William, transforming a technical dispute into a deeply emotional family story. The public reaction sharpened within hours. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered beneath television lights as a major evening broadcast displayed a split-screen image, Diana wearing the tiara on one side, the palace gates on the other. Beneath it appeared a stark headline, "Who owns a royal memory?" The image captured everything the palace had tried to contain. Admirers began leaving flowers near the railings, not because Diana had been forgotten, but because they believed William had defended her place in royal history. William watched the coverage privately with Catherine and looked increasingly uncomfortable. The prince told her he had never wanted another public war fought in his mother's name. He had wanted one thing corrected quietly and clearly. Catherine reminded him that once the ceremony was halted, the meaning of that decision no longer belonged only to the palace. People saw Diana in the dispute because they still carried their own memories of her. Camilla saw the same broadcast. The Queen Consort reached for the remote when Diana's photograph appeared beside the headline, but she stopped before turning the television off. She lowered her hand and kept watching. For the first time, she understood how completely public feeling had moved against the idea of permanent personal ownership. Camilla later told Charles in a private conversation that she would accept the revised classification. The king heard the decision without celebrating it. He knew acceptance did not erase the humiliation she felt, but it did end the battle. Soon afterward, the palace announced the corrected arrangement. The tiara would remain historically identified with Diana, while Camilla would hold no permanent personal ownership. Ceremonial use could still be approved under royal custody, meaning the piece could be worn without transferring its historical identity. William now had what he had demanded from the beginning. Camilla had accepted the correction. Charles had backed the settlement. Only one act remained. The public had delivered its emotional verdict before the palace delivered its formal one, and now William had to return to the ceremony he stopped and show what his decision had truly been for. When the investiture finally resumed, the room looked almost exactly as it had before William stopped it. The same ceremonial setting remained. The same officials returned to their places. Yet nothing felt unchanged. Diana's tiara was no longer registered as Camilla's personal property. Camilla had accepted the correction. Charles had acknowledged his failure to intervene sooner. And William returned knowing he had defended his mother's legacy without allowing that defense to destroy his family. William authorized the ceremony to continue, only after receiving formal confirmation that the original registration had been replaced. The prince had demanded more than a temporary pause. He wanted the classification corrected. meaning the official record showing how the tiara was identified, controlled, and connected to royal history. The revised wording preserved Diana's association with the piece, while placing any future ceremonial use under royal custody. Camilla could still wear it if permission was given, but she could no longer claim permanent personal ownership. William paused before returning to his role. Catherine came close but did not interrupt the silence. The Princess of Wales understood what the moment had cost him, and he understood what her calm support had prevented. His anger had nearly turned the dispute into something larger than the tiara itself. He looked toward her, steadied himself, and moved forward with quiet resolve. This time, he was not entering the ceremony to fight. He was entering because the reason for stopping it had finally been addressed. Camilla returned with controlled composure. The Queen Consort did not pretend the previous confrontation had never happened, and William did not offer an easy gesture of reconciliation. They exchanged one brief look. There was no embrace, no dramatic apology, and no attempt to erase the hurt between them. But the hostility had changed. She had accepted the corrected classification, and he had accepted that ceremonial use did not have to mean ownership. Charles watched both of them with a different understanding. The king finally recognized that his greatest mistake had not been loving Camilla or remembering Diana. It had been allowing silence to become authorization. By failing to challenge the wording when he had the chance, he had allowed an administrative decision to become a family wound. Diana's memory now stood on firmer ground. Preserving her historical connection to the tiara did not mean freezing the monarchy in the past. It meant acknowledging that moving forward did not require rewriting what came before. Camilla kept her dignity and her place in the present. William protected his mother's legacy without demanding that the present be erased in return. William removed his ceremonial gloves as the investiture concluded and placed them calmly on the table, repeating the gesture that had begun the crisis. This time, he gave no order to stop. He looked toward Charles, received a quiet nod, and continued. The investiture had been halted because one name disappeared from a record. It resumed only after that name was restored. Camilla kept her place in the present. Diana kept her place in history. And William made certain the monarchy understood that honoring one could never require erasing the other. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.